Welcome to the AI Coach by Anil Nathu.
Hi there.
Today on the deep dive, we're getting into something absolutely core to how business is run. The different kinds of decisions leaders and teams make every single day.
Yeah, it's not just one simple act, is it, making a decision? It's way more nuanced.
Exactly. And we want to break down those nuances for you, the learner, so you can really get a handle on why understanding these types is so critical. It helps you navigate, make better choices yourself, and sort of see the bigger picture.
And we're not just pulling this out of thin air. We've looked at some really solid sources, foundational stuff from OpenStax on management principles,
Okay.
some deeper insights from Emerald Insight on strategy and decision styles,
Right.
a great module from EPG Pathshala that really categorizes these things well,
Right.
and even some interesting perspectives from Bearing Point on how our own behavior plays into all this.
Okay, quite a mix then. So let's get started. Where do we begin with sorting these decisions out? The EPG Paschala source mentions they vary based on what? Future impact, complexity.
That's right. Things like, how far ahead does this decision reach? What's its overall impact? How many moving parts are involved? And crucially, is this something we decide all the time, or is it brand new?
Okay, so based on that, a really common way to split them is programmed versus non-programmed. What's the difference there?
Yeah, that's a fundamental one. Program decisions are, well, pretty much what they sound like. They're routine, structured,
Ticking boxes almost.
sort of, yeah. Think about reordering office supplies when they get low, or processing a standard leave request based on company policy.
Yeah.
They're usually clear rules or procedures.
And these are typically handled lower down the chain.
Generally, yes. Lower-level managers often handle these because the process is defined. It's efficient, frees up senior people for the trickier stuff.
Which brings us to non-programmed decisions. These sound like the opposite end of the spectrum.
Totally. These are the novel situations, the unstructured problems. There's no pre-existing playbook.
So like deciding to launch a whole new product line or maybe how to handle a sudden PR crisis.
Exactly. These need serious judgment, creativity, maybe some deep analysis. They often fall to top management because the stakes are higher and the path isn't clear.
And that OpenStack source mentions something about our brains engaging differently here, like a more reflective system kicks in.
Precisely.
Yeah.
For program stuff, we can often rely on habit or simple rules, kind of automatic. But for non-programmed, we need to slow down, gather info, weigh options. It's that more deliberate thinking process.
Okay, programmed and non-programmed. Got it. What's another way we can slice this? Organizational versus personal decisions. Seems straightforward.
It does on the surface. Organizational decisions are made, officially for the benefit of the company to meet its goals.
Right.
Personal decisions are, well, personal. They affect your own life outside of work.
But the key difference isn't just what they affect, is it? It's about delegation.
That's the crucial point from the EPG Paschala source. Authority for organizational decisions can be delegated down the hierarchy. A CEO might delegate budget decisions to department heads, for example.
But you can't delegate your personal decision about, say, where you want to live.
Exactly. That responsibility stays with you. It's an important distinction for understanding accountability within a company.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move on. How about operational versus policy decisions? Policy sounds big picture.
It generally is. Policy decisions are usually made by top management and set the overall direction or framework for the organization. They're long-term strategic choices.
Like a school deciding its core mission, or maybe a tech company deciding to pivot to a subscription model.
Perfect examples. They define the rules of the game, essentially, for the whole organization. They have broad, lasting impact.
So if policy decisions set the game rules, operational decisions are playing the game day to day.
That's a great way to put it. Operational decisions are the shorter-term, more routine choices made usually by middle or lower management to implement the policies and keep things running.
Can you give an example of connecting the two?
Sure. The policy might be, say, that the company offers performance bonuses based on specific criteria. That's the policy decision from the top.
Okay.
The operational decision would be the department manager actually calculating who gets what bonus this quarter based on that policy and the performance data.
Right. Executing within the established framework. Clear. Next up, opportunity versus problem-solving decisions. Proactive versus reactive.
Precisely. Opportunity decisions are about looking ahead, seeking growth, improvement. It's spotting a chance in the market, deciding to invest in new tech to get ahead.
So seeing potential and going for it.
Exactly. Problem-solving decisions, on the other hand, are about reacting to something undesirable that's already happened. Sales are down, a machine broke, there's a customer complaint.
So fixing things.
Right. You're trying to get things back to where they should be, or maybe just minimizing damage. Recognizing which mode you're in, seeking opportunity or solving a problem, really shapes how you approach the decision.
That distinction feels important for mindset. Okay, we also have routine versus strategic decisions. This sounds a bit like programmed versus non-programmed again. Is there overlap?
There's definitely overlap, yeah. Routine decisions share that characteristic of being repetitive, common, often not needing a ton of analysis, like approving a small expense claim that fits the rules.
Gotcha.
Strategic decisions, though, are the big ones. They directly impact the organization's long-term goals and objectives. Emerald Insight really emphasizes this.
So major investments, entering new international markets, acquiring another company, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. These usually involve significant resources, lots of analysis, looking at the competitive landscape, and they have consequences that ripple out for a long time. Top management territory, typically.
And this is where maybe something like the AI coach by Anil Nathu could really come into play, helping sort through all that complex data for strategic calls.
Potentially, yes. For decisions involving vast amounts of data or complex scenario planning, AI tools can certainly augment the human judgment needed for those big strategic moves.
It's interesting. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Research-based versus interactive decisions. This sounds like it's about the process used.
Exactly. Research-based means you're digging deep into data, evidence, maybe conducting studies before making the call.
So very analytical, lots of homework first.
Right. Think market research before a product launch, or extensive testing for a new drug. The goal is to reduce uncertainty through knowledge.
And interactive. Is that about bringing people in?
Yes, interactive decisions emphasize consultation, collaboration, getting input from the team or stakeholders.
Like brainstorming sessions or asking for feedback?
Precisely. It's valuable when you need diverse perspectives or when getting people on board with the final decision is really important for making it stick.
That makes sense. Which flows nicely into our next pair, individual versus group decisions.
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory in a way. Individual decisions are made by one person, often efficient, especially for routine or less critical matters.
But potentially missing other viewpoints.
That's the trade-off. Group decisions involve a team, a committee, whatever structure fits. The EPG Pathshala source mentions a good example, like preparing for an important accreditation visit, you need input from various departments.
So group decisions might take longer, maybe more debate.
They often do, yes.
Yeah.
Reaching consensus or even just a majority view can be time-consuming. But the hope is you get a richer, more robust decision, especially for complex or important issues.
Okay, one last category pair. Major versus minor decisions. Is this just about scale?
Largely, yes. It relates back to impact and who typically makes the call. Major decisions like buying land for a new factory involve big resources, have significant consequences, and are usually handled higher up.
And minor decisions.
Things like ordering pens and paper for the office, limited impact, low cost, usually delegated way down the line. It's about appropriate allocation of decision-making effort.
Wow, okay, that's a lot of categories, but seeing them laid out like that really clarifies how many different kinds of thinking go into running a business.
It really does.
Yeah.
And understanding these isn't just academic, it's practical.
So let's talk about those practical takeaways. What are the key insights you think someone listening should really grasp from all this?
I think the biggest one is simply realizing that not all decisions are created equal. You can't or shouldn't use the same process for everything.
Right, using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, or vice versa.
Exactly. Trying to build consensus with a huge group on ordering coffee supplies is overkill, but making a multi-million-dollar investment decision alone, based on a gut feeling, probably not wise either.
So the first step is always identifying, what kind of decision am I actually facing here?
Yes. Is it routine or strategic? Does it need deep research or broad input? Is it fixing a problem or chasing an opportunity? Answering that helps you choose the right tools, the right people, and the right amount of effort.
That makes a lot of sense. What about different approaches to making decisions beyond just the type? The sources mention things like centralized versus decentralized.
Yes. That's about where the decision-making power sits. Centralized means most key decisions are made at the top. Think of maybe a fast food chain, ensuring absolute consistency across all locations.
Strict control from HQ.
Right. Decentralized pushes decision-making authority down to lower levels, maybe like a hotel chain, letting local managers adapt services to their specific clientele. It allows for more flexibility and responsiveness locally.
And we touched on group versus individual already. What about participatory versus non-participatory? Is that similar to group individual?
It's related, but it's more of a spectrum. It's about how much employees are involved in decisions that affect them or their work, even if the final call rests with a manager.
Yeah, so asking for input versus just telling people the decision.
Exactly. Participatory approaches where employees have some say tend to link to higher job satisfaction and better organizational performance. According to some research, people feel more ownership.
Makes sense. And then there was democratic versus consensus-based. What's the subtle difference there?
Democratic usually implies a majority rules kind of vote.
Yeah.
Get over 50%, and that's the decision.
Okay.
Consensus-based is often a bit harder.
Yeah.
It aims for a decision that everyone in the group can fundamentally agree to support, even if it isn't their first choice. It requires more discussion and compromise.
Right. Finding common ground everyone can live with.
Yeah.
So we have the types of decisions and these different approaches. How does this all tie into broader strategy? Emerald Insight mentions strategic management.
Yes, strategic management is the overarching process of setting goals and making decisions to achieve a competitive advantage. The types of decisions we make, especially the strategic ones, and the approach we use are fundamental components of effective strategic management.
It also mentions strategic thinking versus strategic planning.
Right. Strategic thinking is more about the vision, the creativity, understand the competitive landscape. Strategic planning is the more systematic process of defining steps, allocating resources, and setting timelines to execute the strategy. You really need both.
And decision-making styles fit in here too, rational versus intuitive.
Absolutely. The rational style is what we often think of first. Systematic, logical, collecting all the data, weighing pros and cons. Very analytical.
Like the research-based decisions we talked about.
Exactly. But then there's the intuitive style. This relies more on feelings, gut instincts, experience.
That hunch.
Sort of, yeah. But it's not just random guessing. It can be based on years of accumulated experience, what they call implicit intuition, or sometimes just a strong feeling about a situation, which is explicit intuition.
And one isn't necessarily better than the other?
Well, the research suggests that the fit is important. Sometimes a quick intuitive call is right for a fast-moving situation. Other times a deep rational analysis is needed. Often the best decisions blend both. These styles can actually influence how well strategic thinking translates into real performance.
Okay, so we have the types, the approaches, the styles, but we're human,
Yeah.
right? We're not perfectly rational calculating machines. That bearing point source mentioned behavioral influences.
Ah, yes, this is fascinating stuff. Behavioral economics really sheds light on this. We have systematic biases, cognitive shortcuts. Basically, our brains aren't always purely logical, especially under pressure.
Professor Ivo Vlaev's work was mentioned?
Yes, he's a key figure in this field. It ties into the dual process model, the idea of system one thinking, which is fast, intuitive, automatic,
Our gut reaction.
pretty much.
Yeah.
And system two, which is slow, deliberate, analytical, the effortful thinking.
Yeah.
Non-programmed decisions really demand system two, but system one often tries to jump in with shortcuts, which can lead to biases.
So how do we manage these biases? The source mentioned something called mind space.
Right, Mindspace is a helpful framework, kind of a checklist, developed to understand influences on behavior. Each letter stands for a different type of influence. M for messenger, who delivers the information matters. I for incentives. N for norms, what others are doing. D for defaults, we tend to stick with the preset option.
Like pre-tick boxes online.
Exactly. S is salience, what grabs our attention. P for priming subtle cues affecting later choices. A for affect our emotional state. C for commitment, sticking to what we said we'd do. And E for ego, protecting our self-image.
Wow, that's a lot of subtle influences.
It is. And being aware of them, things like confirmation bias, where we favor info that confirms what we already believe, or anchoring, where we get stuck on the first piece of info we hear, is crucial.
How does this awareness help in practice? Can we just think harder to avoid bias?
Trying to just change our minds is often less effective than changing the context of the decision.
What does that mean?
It means designing processes to counteract biases. For example, using CV-blind recruitment, where names and identifying details are removed initially. That counteracts unconscious bias related to the messenger or maybe salience of certain names or backgrounds.
So structuring the decision process itself to minimize the chance for bias to creep in.
Precisely. It's about building smarter systems, not just relying on individual willpower to overcome deep-seated cognitive tendencies. This applies across all decision types, from operational tweaks to major strategic choices.
This adds a whole other layer of complexity, but also practicality. Okay, we've covered a huge amount of ground. If you had to boil it down to key lessons or action items for you, the learner, listening right now, what would they be?
First, just recognizing the different decision types is foundational. You can't pick the right tool if you don't know the job. Second, align the decision type with the right management level and approach don't overcomplicate the simple stuff or underanalyze the critical stuff.
Right.
Third, appreciate that both rational analysis and intuition have their place. Don't dismiss your gut, but don't rely on it blindly either, especially for big calls.
And be aware of those sneaky biases.
Definitely. Use frameworks like Mindspace, perhaps, just as a mental check. Ask yourself, could bias be playing a role here? How can we structure this choice to be more objective? And maybe consider how the AI Coach by Anil Nathu could support more objective, data-driven analysis in certain situations.
And finally,
Think strategically. Even if your role is in top management, understanding how your decisions fit into the bigger picture, the organization's strategy, is incredibly valuable.
okay, a great action item then, as you suggested earlier, is for you listening to take a recent decision you were part of.
Yeah, try and label it. Was it programmed, non-programmed,
Yeah.
strategic, operational, group, individual?
And then reflect. Was the approach right? Were biases maybe at play? What could have been done differently?
That reflection is where the real learning happens.
Fantastic. So let's try and pull this all together in a quick summary.
Okay, we've mapped out the key decision categories. Program for routine, non-program for novelty, organizational for the company, personal for the individual, policy for the long-term rules, operational for the day-to-day execution, opportunity seeking versus problem solving, routine versus high stakes, strategic, research heavy versus interactive collaborative, individual versus group efforts, and finally, major versus minor based on impact.
We also looked at how decisions are made, centralized at the top or decentralized down the chain, by groups or individuals, with employee participation or without, aiming for democratic majority or full consensus.
And we connected this to strategy, the importance of strategic thinking and planning, and how decision styles, both rational and intuitive, influence success.
Critically, we brought in the human element, those behavioral biases identified through frameworks like Mindspace, reminding us we're not always perfectly logical, and highlighting the value of designing decision context to mitigate these influences.
It's about building awareness across all these dimensions for more effective outcomes.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to leave you with. Imagine the cumulative impact if you consciously applied this knowledge. If, for every significant choice, you pause to identify the decision type, consider the best approach, acknowledge potential biases, how much more effective and strategically aligned could your decision-making become?
Something to really think about. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us today. Visit the AI Coach website for more AI insights by Anil Nathu.